Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name's Easton Cook and I went to church this morning. I know I didn't. Hey, thank you. No, hold the applause. Pretty incredible, I know. I'm joking about the applause, but let me tell you, I actually really loved the service today. The entire service was centered around Palm Sunday. And Palm Sunday, if you're not familiar, is the celebration and remembrance of the day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey while people praised him as he passed through. And I'm going to break this story down and explain why it is so important. But before I do, y'all make sure and subscribe. You can also support this channel by hitting that little thanks tab right beneath this video. Any support, greatly appreciated. Now let's talk. I'm going to read from Matthew. This is Matthew 21, verse 1. That way we're all on the same page, and then I'll provide 3 call-outs after that. Here we go. Now when they drew near to Jerusalem and came to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village in front of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, 'The Lord needs them,' and he will send them at once." This took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, saying, "Say to the daughter of Zion, Behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden." The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put on them their cloaks, and he sat on them. Most of the crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. And the crowds that went before him and that followed him were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" And when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred up, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowd said, "This is the prophet Jesus, the Nazareth of Galilee." So my first call out, Jesus rode into the city on a donkey. See, he did this to fulfill the prophecy of Zechariah, and this is back in Zechariah 9:9 if you want to check it out for yourself. And Matthew states this right here in his writing. Now understand this, Jesus could have rode in on a horse, right? A mighty beast, a symbol of power and authority, but instead he chose a donkey. And as Matthew writes, and I'm so glad that he included this because this is really neat, a beast of burden. And understand, this same story is in each one of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And in Luke, he includes the direction of Jesus to the disciples to untie a colt and bring it to him, a colt on which no one has ever sat. And the symbolism in this just overwhelms me. See, Paul tells us in Romans that the wages of sin is death. For everything, spiritual and physical, there is a cost. For every decision you make, every action you take, and every word you speak, there is a cost, and the cost is the consequence produced by your choices. For example, if you cheat on your spouse, divorce is a justified cost. If you break the law, prison or a fine is a justified cost. And if you sin, death is a justified cost. The payment for sin is death, it's blood. So when Jesus came into Jerusalem, the crowd praised him. They cheered because they knew that a man of God had come to liberate them. Now understand, they didn't fully recognize how. They believed that it would be more like a physical, right? Like a liberation from the oppression of Rome. A warrior king who came to defeat all their enemies and set them free. So they praised and they cheered, laying down palm branches and even their own clothing on the road as Jesus rode in. But what they didn't fully understand was that Jesus came to give himself up, God in the flesh, to liberate all people of their sins. You see, the debt had been tallied and the bill came due. Sin requires death as payment, and only Jesus, a perfect man, could give this payment for all people. And that's all people, before, during, and after his time on earth. So when Jesus asks for a colt, this donkey on which nobody has ever sat, he's giving us a representation of what is to come, for what he's going to do for me and what he's going to do for you. That this beast of burden, this donkey, will carry a burden that nobody has ever carried before. A death to pay for the freedom of all people from the constant sin in their life. Jesus was to carry that burden, a burden of which no one has ever carried, and that donkey was to carry him. The second call out is the branches. When a kingdom had won a war, the king would ride on a horse through the streets, and he'd have his entourage, and palm branches would be laid all over the streets to show that the victory had been won. So crowds would flood the streets, and a celebration and cheering would take place because the battle was done. No more war, no more chaos. It was over. Peace, finally. So the time of war had ended. Rejoice, celebrate. It's done. That's what these palm branches meant. So during Passover, a religious holiday where Jews would make their pilgrimage to Jerusalem to celebrate the liberation of their ancestors from Egypt, there's an estimate of how many people may have been in the city when Jesus rode through the streets. 1 to 3 million people. Y'all, I did not know that. As I was writing this script and doing research, I kept reading that over and over and over again. And this totally changes the visual for me. You see, most depictions of this event are really just a couple people on Jesus' side, right? Just a couple over here and a couple over here, and Jesus is riding like very humbly on a donkey. And it just doesn't really bring to life what truly is happening. But in reality, there were crowds, and the people's praise had to be insanely loud. I mean, if you were just outside the city and you hear this going on, you would go running into the city, pushing past people to see what's going on just out of fear of FOMO itself. And the praise and the rejoicing complemented the palm branches that were being laid on the ground. You see, the people were acknowledging their faith that the battle had already been won. Before this battle had even taken place, and remember, in their minds, it was a physical war that was going to happen, they believed it was already over. It was already won. Jesus, this man of God, he was going to take care of it. He's the Messiah, the Christ. He's already got it won. Let's lay the branches down because, hey, we already got victory. I mean, that type of faith, love, and worship. This is why the palm branches are such a significance. Palm Sunday is remembering this event. It's a reminder of no matter how bad the world gets, how many obstacles are in your way, or how many negative things are happening over and over in your life, the battle's won. And that's the reason we celebrate. And the third call out is probably the most controversial, but I'm not here to argue. There is this debate on whether or not the same crowds that praised and laid palm branches down as Jesus rode past them in the city are the same crowds that just a few days later are screaming, "Crucify him." Whether you believe that these are the same groups of people or not, right? The same group saying, "Hosanna in the highest," is the same group saying, "Crucify him," days later. Or if they're two separate groups, I'm not here to argue. But what I am here to say is that with roughly 2 million people in the city, I'm sure that there was some type of overlap. So with that being said, I want to use this as a moment of warning. Be careful. Jesus came in and surely he knew the hearts and minds of those surrounding him, of those cheering him. And for some, it would only take days to change their mind. And while I researched this, I saw the word fickle a lot, right? Look at these fickle human beings, and people love Jesus one day and turn away from him the next. But that's not the point I want to make here. Instead, I want to take this and apply it to your life now. I want to warn you and remind you that people whom you believe are on your side and that praise you and love you may only praise you on the surface. Do not just openly trust anybody. Beware of wolves in sheep's skin. Because sometimes those who are nicest to your face are the very same who plunge the knife in your back the deepest. Take into account even Jesus kept a tight circle of 12, and then even that he had an inner circle of 3. And yet Jesus was betrayed time and time again. Peter betrayed him, Judas literally sold him out, and some in the crowd praised him one day and then condemned him the next. So understand this point has less to do with the story of the palm branches laid out and more to do with your life right now. A bit of wisdom, a takeaway. Discern for yourself whom you keep the closest. Be wise in making the decision on who you're going to allow into your inner circle. But of course, let's bring it back to Jesus. Jesus knew all the hearts and minds of those who praised him with their lips and then betray him. He paid their debt anyway. One of my favorite quotes is, "Jesus knew, but Judas ate too." That's the God we serve. That's the God who already won the battle. And that's why we remember on this day why the palm branches were laid. And that's all for today, y'all. Thanks for watching. Make sure and follow me on the socials. You can also shop my Amazon storefront, all in the link in the description below. Support the channel using that little thanks tab below here. I'll talk to y'all next time. Happy Palm Sunday. God be with you.